Okay. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon to you all our viewers across the world, and welcome back to another special edition of Global Arena on our YouTube channel, Global Arena TV. I am Maryam Adamu, a level 200 student of Mass Communication at Bayero University Kano, together with my co-host, Umar Isa Dandago. On today's episode, an episode like no other, with our important guest, an amazing young man who is an award-winning video journalist and a documentary filmmaker from the United Kingdom. He has produced series of wonderful, interesting, and amazing news documentaries and packages. He is Elliot Hartley. Elliot will be telling us more about himself and his story, how he has grown up from nothing to where he is today, a highly celebrated young man with special talent. But the question is, who has been supporting him? We will find out in this program. Once again, let's welcome Elliot Hartley. Elliot, thank you so much for honoring our invite, and thank you so much for coming up to our show.
Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, Maryam, thank you very much.
Once again, thank you, Elliot, for being on the show. It's an honor having you on the show also. I think you're the youngest guest on the show, definitely. Most of the people that I have hosted so far for more than a year and a half or so are elderly people, professors, senior journalists, diplomats who have worked in different places. But then, amazingly, you are the very first teenager as a guest to appear on Global Arena. So that's a huge honor for the Global Arena family.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's an absolute honor to be on the show. So,
all right.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
So, Elliot, I have tried to watch a lot of video of yours, and I have noticed that you have quite achieved a lot within a short period of time. So, what's the secret?
Well, it's a very good question. And thank you very much for that. What I'll say is, I think everyone starts somewhere, and I don't think if someone's telling you that they're amazing, then they're lying, because I think everyone is always able to improve. So I suppose, if you look at the films that I'm making now, I've still got a long way to go to making, even better ones. And I suppose that's a road that kind of never ends. But then again, the films that I'm making now are definitely, I think, better than the ones I was making 3-4 years ago. So I suppose it comes down to getting critical feedback from your friends, your family, and even other people, and building on that, and just making content as good as you can possibly make.
That's actually good. So when I was watching a video, I realized that so many great British journalists have praised you or your work. Let's say Greg Milliam of the Sky News. He said, and I quote, "You have a very impressive portfolio and clearly a real dedication to the art of storytelling." Another one, Jimmy Bonds, former Financial Times journalist. He said, and I quote, "Great work with you, Elliot Hartley. You have started young, full of energy, curiosity, and creativity. You will go far." And the last one that I will quote, which is a funny one, from Richard Springer, The Guardian. "I am not sure what I was doing at 16, but it looks like you already have a drive and a commitment that will serve you well in the industry." So how does that make you feel from this great journalist?
Yeah, well, I suppose, it's absolutely great to hear these compliments from these, world famous journalists. I think two of those that you've said, I was a few years ago, I was emailing loads of different organizations, for example, the BBC, Sky, as you mentioned, and I believe the Guardian, lots of different media organizations for work experience. And from that, I got out of it. I didn't actually get any in-person experience at the end, but I got a lot of really good advice and a lot of compliments that clearly look quite good on the website, I suppose. But yeah, no, it was absolutely great to be honoured by these people. Yeah, so very happy.
I want to ask about your biography. So, who is Elliot Hartley? Tell us more about yourself.
Sure. Well, I'm currently a student in secondary school in the United Kingdom, of course. Currently in year 12, we call it here, and I think it's the same in Nigeria, but I'm not sure. But anyway, yeah. So currently,
is it your second to last year?
Second to last year, yeah.
Yes, of course. So if it were in Nigerian context, it would have been somewhere like SS2.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So currently studying, and here I'm doing A levels. So I'm doing photography, business, and English. But I'm looking to get into a career in journalism. That's something that really interests me. And it's interested me for many years since I first picked up a camera. I suppose I came from a more, I suppose I came from a more background focused on filmmaking. Yeah, so I came from my dad was a journalist, yeah. My mum, she was not, but yeah, so he was definitely a person that encouraged me to get into this kind of career. And yeah, so I suppose I came more from a background in filmmaking. I was making films with a lot of my friends, and then from there, I started interviewing a few people, and it kind of morphed into this kind of video journalism. And I thought that's something that sounds really interesting, and I'd like to get into. So yeah, that's where I'm at the moment.
Okay, your father was a journalist. Was a journalist or is a journalist?
Was a journalist. Yeah, he's still working in media of sorts, but not in journalism anymore.
Talk to us about him. Did he ever work for the BBC or Sky, or what's his name?
I think my dad's name is Dom Hartley.
Mm-hmm.
He's done a bit of journalism in his past, worked for, I believe, the Money Channel, which doesn't exist anymore, but he reported kind of finance for them. I believe he did work for BBC Look East for a while. And yeah, he's worked many different jobs and is a huge inspiration to me. So yeah, no, he's definitely given me a lot of push into this career. So yeah, it's good.
So here we are, Maryam and I from Nigeria, from Kano State, northern Nigeria, expressing our deeply profound gratitude to your father for being such a hugely significant figure in your career, in your life.
Yeah, he's a very good guy, yeah.
So shout out to him. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I'm sure he will see the video, so our regards to him.
Yeah, sure.
And someday we'll catch
up. If you watch. Yeah. Sounds good. Okay.
You know, my next question was that I was going to ask you, like, who inspired you, but I think you have already answered the question. Your dad did.
Yeah, right? I suppose so. Yeah. Well, my dad is one of the people that's inspired me. He's kind of pushed me into this career. But there's been loads of other people. I suppose, you know, incredible journalists at the moment that we're seeing doing incredible work in their field. People like Jeremy Bowen. You've got Ross Atkins, who I was at the book event for, and you know he's written a book recently called The Art of Explanation, which was absolutely brilliant read. But I mean, there's so many people doing such great work in the journalism industry at the moment, and they're all great inspirations.
Yeah, definitely. Ross Atkins is one of the best journalists I know and I respect, of course. I follow his, I've been following him ever since he was presenting Outside Source on the BBC World News channel. And then now he presents mostly explainer videos. He produces explainer videos together with his production team. And they hugely put in a lot of ideas and information in very short videos, less than 10 minutes. And if you watch them, you'll be able to understand what's happening in the subject matter. So, of course, and I hope one day I will host Ross Atkins here on the show. He's a huge...
Yeah.
Sure.
He's a very nice guy. And I think what he's been doing at the moment with his explainer videos is absolutely brilliant. I think I was listening to this. I think on Radio 4 BBC, they've just been doing a podcast about this, but they were talking about the difference between, I believe it was the inverted paragraph pyramid when you're writing, which is always putting the most important information at the top and then working down to the least important information. But that, but it doesn't really. There's limitations to it, because if a member of your audience is coming to this story for the first time, they don't get the necessary context behind it. So I suppose what happens with Ross Atkins videos is they start from the very beginning. They give someone that might not have ever heard about this subject the context that they need to fully understand it. It explains who's who in the conflict, if he's reporting on something like that. So yeah, it's something that is definitely, and I think there's a huge gap in the market for this in the media industry at the moment. I'd love to see more news organizations doing this, but yeah.
Yeah, of course. So you're talking about the kinds of explainers that Ross Atkins produces, which tend to kind of, bridge a lot of gaps that are there in the industry, in journalism and reporting, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I love, one thing that I love about Ross Atkins is his unique style. For example, the way he dresses, the way he speaks. He explains the concepts, the ideas, the news stories in such a way that it feels as if he's telling you a story. He's narrating a story face to face when you're sitting face to face with him. It doesn't seem like he's reading from a teleprompter or from a scripted document or something like that. That also means a lot, because you have this sense of understanding the news as part and parcel of I mean, like you feel like as if you are also diving deeply into the ocean of the news stories. Yeah,
absolutely. I think he speaks a lot about that. It's the kind of, it seems so well done, but also unrehearsed in a way. And it's not that it's not rehearsed, it's that it's been rehearsed so many times that it almost seems like it is unrehearsed, like he's not even reading from a script, that he almost knows it all off by heart, because in the end of the day, he basically does. And also you mentioned storytelling. I mean, it's such, if you can put all of the information into a coherent story for your audience, it keeps them interested. And I think that's one of the most important things, reporting the news factually is, of course, the most important thing. But if you can bring your audience along with a coherent story, then it's invaluable.
That's great. Have you ever met him in person, face to face, Ross Atkins?
I have, yes. Yeah, I went to his book event. He was doing a talk at Tortoise headquarters in London. So I was very happy to receive a press invite to that event. And I went and I spoke to him about it. And it was, very good event to be a part of.
That's great. That's great. All right, Maryam, over to you.
So what of the devices you use? Does the school provide it for you, or they are all personal?
Yeah, so these are personal devices. I've got my camera here, actually. 1 second. So I'm shooting on, at the moment, for my videos, I've got a Panasonic GH5. I bought this a few years ago, and I've basically been using it for everything ever since. But I've had this for years now, and it's served me very well. In terms of audio, I've got the DJI mics, which are Radio Lav mics, and they work very well, especially for interviews. But it's quite a small setup. I've got a tripod, that camera, some mics, and that's about it really. But and editing on a laptop as well. But I mean, it's absolutely great kit to use.
Wow, this is super.
Okay, when there is need for you to travel, how do you do it? Like, does the school allow you to go out and come back, or you have to wait till you're on a break?
So I make most of my content when I'm on the school holidays, as you know, being here, there's a big focus on education, of course. And when I can find some free time, it's always good to try and find a story that I think an audience would be interested in, that I think maybe is underreported and needs telling. And I always use these kind of half term or holiday breaks to try and make this content. So yeah.
So how did you find your first documentary? You know, sometimes when the first time to do something, sometimes get nervous, or was it really hard, or it was just smooth?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that. So I think the first film, or the first documentary kind of journalistic style film that I made was with a charity called Aid to the Church in Need. And that was actually organised by the school. And I was talking to a guy called Fionn Shiner, who works for the charity. And they're a charity that looks at Christian persecution across the globe. So I was interviewing him about what the charity does, that kind of thing. And, you know, of course, you kind of get a bit nervous when you do these interviews, but over time, less nervous, and it kind of becomes almost second nature in a way. So now I've been interviewing the same charity, but I've been doing, I've been down to their events now at the Houses of Parliament in London, which was an absolute honour to attend, talking to the people from their charity, hearing from MPs about why this issue is so bad, why the issue of Christian persecution is so widespread, and I've been making these reports recently on it. So it's absolutely great to do.
So Elliot, in everything that we do, in every field that we take, right, we always have the best part, like something we always look forward to. So what is the best part of your career of journalism?
What's the best part of it? I suppose where I'm at the moment, I'm very happy with. And of course, in the future, I'd love to have the opportunity to kind of take this full time to work in a job in journalism would be absolutely amazing. And I suppose, I mean, the best thing about it is the interesting people that you talk to. Global Arena TV, which is, you know, absolutely incredible. But there's so many people that you end up talking to just because of the job that you do, because, you know, you get to experience different worldviews from so many different people. So, yeah, I think that's the highlight of the role. Many journalists will agree, I'm sure.
Wow, that's great. Again, one more thing I forgot to ask you about Ross Atkins. No, not a question. I hope one day you will recommend us to him so that he can come on board and speak on the show, since he's your friend now.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, I'm not in contact with him at the moment, but I'm sure I could send him an email on your guys' behalf. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That would be great. Thank you.
Not a problem, yeah.
Yeah, Maryam, over to you.
So you said something, their first documentary about the charity. So did they had a deadline? Have you ever worked with a documentary that had a deadline?
I've done a few videos that have had deadlines. Most of them I kind of take at my own pace. So this Christian persecution film that I made recently was very much done kind of at my own pace. However, there's other films that I've done that have had, you know, deadlines of one day. For example, I recently made a film about an MUN conference, a Model United Nations conference, and that was very short notice. I had a day to put that together, film all of the content, interview all the people, edit it together and post it. So I suppose there's benefits to both of them. If you're working on a very short deadline, it forces you to really consider what you're filming, because you don't have time to scroll through hours of footage and choose the best bits. You have to kind of be quick on your feet. While also, if you're making films on longer scales, then you have more time to think about it, to interview more people, to get it just right, so that when you're ready to publish, it's hopefully the best piece of content that you can make.
So how do you manage the deadlines? How do you manage just the stress of deadlines and reporting?
Yeah, good. It's a good question. I think deadlines can certainly be very stressful, but I suppose the more you do it, the more you learn to cope with it, and just giving yourself as much time as possible. I think journalists are always ending up fighting deadlines, and also, as well as deadlines, kind of time constraints. You know, you've only got 3 minutes to have your news package on the show. So that kind of thing. But it's about learning to work within your limitations and do as well as you can with the time that you get given.
So what is your dream in the field of journalism? Like, where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? You want to work like independently or with an organization?
It's a good question. I think there's benefits to both. What I'd like to do when I leave school, I know that organisations such as the BBC, such as ITV, Channel 4, here in the UK, they have we can do apprenticeships, and they are great opportunities. So instead of going to university and spending a lot of money on a student loan, for example, you can go on an apprenticeship where you get work experience, you get a degree at university level, and you get paid to work. And I think while these are incredibly competitive, I think getting on a scheme like that is invaluable because it connects you with so many people in the industry. It gives you the opportunity to get your work out there and actually get into work instead of spending so much time learning about it and not doing as much, I suppose. But I think working for organizations is great. And I think there's also benefits to being independent. One of the main benefits to being independent, I suppose, is that you don't have to constantly seek permission from so many different, editors to get your story out on air. And there's not as many restrictions. You can kind of make what you want, but you have to build your own audience for that. If you're working through an organization, then they will bring a huge audience to you. But of course, you've got to deal with the limitations of working in an organization like that. But yeah, that's kind of where I'd like to get to.
So BBC, ITV, Channel 4, or let's say Talk TV of Rupert Murdoch, or this one, GB News. Which one do you want to work for?
It's a good question. At the moment, I think maybe the BBC. I've looked at a lot of their work, and if I had to pick one, I know that the BBC are highly respected, not just in the UK but around the world. So I think the BBC. But I mean, every other news organisation, most of them at least, are absolutely brilliant. So I wouldn't have an issue working anywhere. I suppose it's just about getting your foot in the door and getting as much experience as you can and working up from there.
Here in Nigeria, one has to start working voluntarily for local media organizations. Do you have a plan to start with that, or you just want to move up to the highest part of the ladder and start working for the BBC as an international reporter or correspondent or something like that?
Well, I think it's definitely a process before you get to the levels of an international reporter. Fellowship, which is sponsored by the Financial Times, with it's being created by the Student View. They're a charity that's focused on gaining media literacy in students around the UK, but they've put on this fellowship for 30 young people aged, at the time it was 16 to, I believe, 25. And they put on this fellowship with the NCTJ, which was a 26-week long series of Zoom calls teaching you journalism. So I was lucky to get on this scheme, and it's absolutely been brilliant to be a part of this community now. I've been to the Financial Times headquarters in Bracken House in London twice now for some events there as part of the fellowship, and I'm currently working towards a certificate in foundation journalism with the NCTJ, which is the National Council for Training Journalists, and they're the people that train up all the journalists in the United Kingdom, at least. So yeah, I think this fellowship's been, such a huge part of getting experience in the industry. But I mean, trying to find a way in is, so difficult, I think, now, because in the past it was more like, you send a letter or you send an email to an organization or a person at the organization that you like, and they'll say, yeah, come and do a few days of work experience. But as I've learned, I've sent out maybe 100 emails now for work experience, and they all end up saying, we'd love to take you on, but the issue is safeguarding. You have to be over 18. You have to do it through the proper schemes that they arrange. So I think now it's much harder if you want to get your foot in the door at a big organization, but it's certainly doable.
So you said somebody has to be above 18 before they engage in such stuff. How old are you?
I'm 17 at the moment, but what I mean is it depends. So the BBC, for example, they don't really. I couldn't send an email to a BBC journalist and say, "Hey, can you let me into the building for a few days? Maybe I can shadow you. I can see a bit of the work that you're doing." Instead, the organisation is very kind of strict on saying, "Right, you have to go through this. You have to go through this. You have to go through this," which is fair enough. But yeah, just trying to get as much experience as possible is always very important.
Yeah, that's great. And maybe that's why you're doing your stuff independently on YouTube.
At the moment, yeah, I think it's so easy for people now. I mean, even with a phone, to just pick up a camera and start making things, even writing. I know people can contribute now to Substack. It's so easy to get going in this industry now. Everyone's got a phone, more or less. Everyone can get access to the internet to be able to either write or make videos or start a podcast. The barrier to entry is definitely lowered, and I think it's so much easier now to get into the industry. So starting out and making as much work as you can possibly make and building up your portfolio of work without seeking permission from mass news organizations is essential if you want to show that you're worthy of working for them, I suppose.
Yeah, sure. You've come of age. Over to you, Maryam.
So how do you stay informed about current events? Do you use the social media, radio, or people just inform you about current events?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I think no one should ever get all of their information from one source. Okay, I think that's always dangerous, because otherwise you just get given their worldview. I think there's something famous that people say, which is if you share the views of the people around you, then they're probably not your own views. So I think at the end of the day, getting news from loads of different sources is important. For me personally, a few main ones, I listen to Outside Source every week from John Simpson, which comes out Wednesday night. And that's very good to give you a kind of half an hour rundown on world affairs, which I take notes on every week. Ross Atkins, as we mentioned, his videos are very good at helping you to understand where everything fits in together, that kind of thing. But I mean, from loads of independent journalists as well. All these big organizations are great, but there's many smaller stories that they can't necessarily get to and there's a lot of stories that still remain underreported. So looking at independent journalists, I know Johnny Harris used to work for Vox in the US channel, and he sponsored it all through Patreon, which I think is definitely the future for people that want to make their own independent work and who have an audience to back it up. So getting news from loads of different sources is definitely important. Those are a few of the ones that I get mine from.
So you didn't mention radio. You don't use radio over there so much?
I wouldn't say that. No. We do still. I do still listen to the radio. Actually, every morning I listen to on BBC Sounds. They've got BBC News Catch Up now, which is something that they've just introduced, as well as the Today programme on Radio 4. The Guardian have really good podcasts as well. The World at 10 from the Times. The Rest is Politics now with Goalhanger Productions. So many different places that you can get your news from. But I do think that radio and TV, in a sense, are more fading out now, because people love this kind of on-demand news. It's definitely far more now coming from social media, people wanting the news on their apps. With shorter attention spans, less people are sitting down to watch the news at 10 or listen to the radio bulletins. It's far more now people picking up their phone and getting their news from social media. So news organizations having a presence on these platforms is very important if they want to stay relevant, I suppose.
Over here, the radio is quite loved for the older generation. The youth usually pick up the social media.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, and I think the older generation do prefer to kind of not necessarily have this slower pace of content, but I think it's something they're more used to. What we've seen is in the past there was 3 main news organisations in the UK. You had the BBC, ITV, and maybe Channel 4, and they were the main places that you would go if you wanted to watch your news. And now there's so many different platforms. So these main 3 really have to compete if they want to stay relevant with especially the youth of today.
Which site do you use the most?
Which site do I use the most? I'm not sure. I think probably the BBC. I use them a lot. But of course, seeing where the BBC get their news from, a lot of the time it's maybe Reuters, for example. So I do check their website a lot, and as well as that, the New York Times. I don't have a subscription to them, but I do buy their paper quite often and read that. And it's really good. Their international edition is especially good for getting a kind of picture, not necessarily from the UK perspective, but from the kind of global perspective of so people writing in from around the world. So, but getting as many different perspectives as possible is always important.
Okay. Do you have any dream of becoming a foreign correspondent? For example, when you land at the BBC, for example, or ITV or Channel 4, or any of the big media organizations of your choosing that you want to work for, do you want them to send you over to any European country or Africa, for example, or Latin America, or even to the United States of America to cover some of the biggest and most attention-gripping events happening from those places?
I think the job of foreign correspondent is certainly a difficult task to perform. Knowing your languages, for example, knowing how all of the kind of geopolitics works over there, the political systems, that kind of thing, and really having a firm understanding of how it all works is important. I think it is something that I'd like to get into at some point. I'm not sure yet. I'm still considering my options, but foreign correspondent is always something that's really interested me. I recently read John Simpson. He's from the BBC. I recently read his book, We Choose to Speak, of War and Strife. Of course, that's about being the job of the foreign correspondent, and I found that a really interesting book to learn a bit more about that role. So I'd say, yeah, I think it is something that I'd like to venture out into at some point.
I think Simpson has been or is one of the longest serving BBC journalists in there. He has been working for the BBC for nearly about 50 years or so, having covered different wars in different places, Middle East. I believe he has been to Africa and the US. And so he knows, and he has this huge amount of knowledge and experiences of diplomatic issues and international stuff. Yeah, sure. He's a great guy.
I suppose I agree with that a lot, and I suppose maybe sometimes, not necessarily with John Simpson, but with other people, maybe the downside that you get from the amount of knowledge that you get as a journalist is some people automatically assume that their audiences have the same knowledge as them. And I've been recently reading a book from TED Talks, and they were talking about this kind of thing, which is the so-called curse of knowledge. Knowing so much that you assume your audience knows it, and you don't actually explain the full picture to your audience, so they're left feeling confused about certain aspects. So always making sure that the audience, has their questions answered, I think, is the most important thing.
And that's where the role of Ross Atkins comes in, trying to dissect every piece of information to the easy consumption of your audiences, assuming that your audiences don't know anything about the topic and you are introducing it to them for the very first time. And I think that approach is a very good one.
Absolutely, yeah. What Ross has done over the years is absolutely brilliant, and I think we've seen so many places starting to take this on now. Al Jazeera, of course, they've got their series now, which is, I think it's called Start Here.
Yeah,
and they explain these kind of they explain these kind of conflicts around the world, which is absolutely brilliant to see. We've also seen lots of, not necessarily journalists, but YouTubers, in a sense, making these kind of videos explaining geopolitics around the world, which I think, especially with the kind of graphics that they're using with these very well illustrated maps, really helps the audience understand it. But I think a lot of the time they end up starting the thing with, just so you know, I'm not a qualified journalist, but here we go. And I think if we had some journalists that were, I mean, we've seen that Ross Atkins is definitely venturing out into this, but I think if these people got a qualification with journalism, then I think it would really help them to, I don't know, report it in maybe a more impartial way, unbiased in a sense. But I think, there's definitely room for that.
Yeah, of course. Ross claims to be impartial, and as he said in one interview, a guy had with him at is it Cambridge University? The video is there on YouTube. He said that he makes his explainers in such a way that it is the facts that become the celebrities, kind of a thing. It is the fact that reign, that win. It's not like he's presenting a one-sided opinion. He gives you the topic, and he looks at different angles, looks at the topic from different angles, presents all sides of the argument for the audiences to make judgment. And that's what the conventional journalism is. We're expected to be neutral. Well, even though to some journalists now, neutrality means complicity. I'm sure Christian Amampo, the international correspondent, the chief international correspondent for CNN, has this kind of view that one doesn't have to be neutral because neutrality means complicity. If one country is maltreating another, or one community is maltreating another, as a journalist, you shouldn't just keep quiet or be in the middle. Also mention it categorically. It happened when she was reporting some wars in, I think, Central Europe. Back then in the 80s or 90s or something like that. So this is a very serious debate that normally big journalists and professors of journalism have been making, whether or not journalists should be activists or should be just neutral parts, something like that.
Yeah, the question is, activists or journalists? I think that's such a good point that you make. I know Jeremy Bowen is very keen on this kind of thing. He started a podcast recently on BBC Sounds that you can hear, which is called, I believe it's
Jeremy Bowen, the chief international reporter for the
he's a chief international editor of BBC News at the moment, but he's talking about impartiality in journalism, and he says this really useful thing that if one person says that it's raining outside and the other person says it's not, then your job as a journalist isn't to strike balance between them and say, okay, well, it's a bit cloudy then, or or even to pick a side. It's more to just report on the facts, to say actually it is, or actually it isn't raining outside, that kind of thing. I've got impartiality is very hotly debated.
Yeah, I've got it.
Yeah, what's it called?
Frontline journalism. Frontline of journalism.
The front lines of journalism. Yes. No, it's a very well put together series. I'll say that.
Yeah, you've listened to all of the 9 or 10 episodes?
Yeah, I've listened to them, and I think the people that he's had on is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, definitely. Like this guy, this divisive journalist, this guy, what's called the guy who presents Uncensored, Piers Morgan. Yeah, among the people that spoke on the show on the podcast, there is Piers Morgan. Do you know him?
Yes, I'm aware of Piers Morgan. He started, of course, Talk TV after he left his role with Good Morning Britain. On ITV. He basically, on ITV. And I think Piers Morgan is clearly a very opinionated guy, and I know a lot of people have different opinions on him. But I suppose, speaking on behalf of him in a way, I think he sees the opinion as a better way of getting to the truth than impartiality. And I suppose both, in a sense, are tools to get to the truth, which as journalists is our aim. So whatever way you go about doing that, it's up to you. I think impartiality has its strengths, and I think the BBC are, they've had their issues with it in the past, but on the whole, they're incredibly good with their impartiality, with their editorial guidelines, of course. But when it comes down to it, I suppose at the end of the day, they're both ways of getting to the truth.
A lot of people here in Nigeria don't trust the social media when it comes to getting information. How is it like there in the UK? Do you guys trust the social media platforms as a source of information, as a source of news? And personally, Elliot Hartley, do you think it's a good source of news reports?
I think it's a good question. Social media is a very useful platform for many people to get their stories out to the world. Okay, so what I've, especially, what I've been doing, I think I wouldn't be able to do it without platforms such as YouTube, which many will consider as social media. But also the role of citizen journalism now is huge. Okay, so organizations like Bellingcat, for example, are massive on getting information from people's posts online, verifying it and making sure that it's real, and using that to produce reports. So I think social media is great because it opens up the opportunity for many more people to share underreported stories in the world. But I think there are definitely downsides to it. A lot of my friends I know will go on social media and they'll be scrolling through something and they'll see a post and they'll think, oh, and they'll read the fact and they'll think, oh, brilliant. Okay, that must be true if I'm reading it because you read it on social media. It's just not true. In fact, I believe the BBC did a study a few years ago and it was saying that fake news is 4 times more likely to, spreads 4 times more quickly than real news. So sure. It's because I suppose there's that wow factor. People think actually, this is something that's true, when in reality it's not. So there's definitely disadvantages to it. But I think the issue isn't with social media. I think the issue is educating people that are going to be on social media, especially the youth, about media literacy, about knowing how to distinguish between what's real and what's not real. So that kind of thing.
But every field of study has its role, has a role it play in the society, right? So what do you think? What can you say about the role of journalists in the society?
I think that's a very good question, and I think the role of journalists in society cannot be overstated enough. What we've seen in the UK recently, I don't know if you're aware, but what's been happening at the moment is a classic example. It's called the post office scandal. Just to summarize it quickly, it was an issue where there were hundreds of people working in these post offices that got new IT systems. And the systems were saying that they owed the post office loads of money, when in reality it was a problem with the computer. And loads of people went to jail, and people were having to remortgage their homes, give all of their money to try and pay back these debts that weren't their fault, when in reality they were being prosecuted at the highest levels, with people saying, this is your fault, this is your fault. And I think the reason journalists exist is for issues like this, where whatever publication you're working in, this story was first leaked by a woman working at Computer Weekly, a tiny organization that, maybe a few thousand people read every week. They're the people that broke this story that is now the center of the news attention in the UK. And it's up to journalists, no matter at what level you are in your career, to expose corruption. And I think if there aren't journalists calling things out, and and always, trying to make society a better place by speaking the truth and holding the powerful accountable, then society is never going to succeed. So I think the role of journalists cannot be overstated.
Definitely.
So you've been in school, in a boarding school, with the stress and everything. So have there been a moment when you felt like quitting?
I'm not sure there have, actually. I don't know. I think it hasn't been too stressful at the moment, but I think no, I think it's something that I'm very passionate about, and I think it's something that I want to do for maybe the rest of my life. Maybe that will change at some point. I'm not sure, but for the moment, it's something that I'm very passionate about and something that I really want to get into. So I suppose to answer your question, no, not really, but yeah.
So yeah, you're full of exuberance and enthusiasm.
Cheers. Yeah.
Yeah, you know that I don't know. I was watching Piers Morgan a couple of days ago, talking with some of his guests about the issue of mental health and depression, and they mentioned that young people appear to be more depressed than elderly people, and this is largely due to the information overload they experience and they're provided with on social media. Do you also share this opinion that okay, because of social media, now young people tend to be more depressed because they see the wars that are happening, they see expensive lives, they see a lot of things that probably they cannot afford to do or to buy or to have, and then the terrible news coming out of, let's say, Middle East, Ukraine, and other places, for example, that also tends to make people anxious, develop a kind of anxiety, and so on and so forth. Do you also share this view?
Yeah, it's a really good question that you put forward. I think the issue with social media is people, see so many things on social media, and they get a very negative perception of the world, in a sense. And I believe, if you're constantly seeing images come out, about maybe the war in Gaza, very exposed, not censored at all, then it's obviously going to have a huge effect on your mental health if that's what you're scrolling through every day. And also, the content that you like on social media just gets fed straight back to you. So there's no chance that you're going to hear views from other people, and you kind of get stuck in an echo chamber of sorts. And I think also, especially with young people, they end up having a negative perception of themselves through social media. They're always trying to aspire to, the highest standards that they see all of these kind of influencers having on social media. So I think at the end of the day, that's not a reason to stop reporting on conflicts, because getting people informed is very important. But actually, the world is a much more calm place than it has been in years past. But people seem to think that that it's that it's absolutely awful. So I think there's not enough. At the end of the day, actually, I think there's not enough good being reported in the world. And that doesn't mean we can ignore all the bad stuff happening. We have to report on it, and people have to know about it, because if they don't, then we're essentially putting our fingers in our ears, and there's no point in doing that. But I think it's a mixture of things. You have to keep people updated with these issues, while at the same time making sure that you're not constantly exposing people to really graphic images that are going to damage their mental health.
Yeah, of course. Maryam.
So I said quite a lot of great journalists have praised you. So what can you say? What can you tell me, Umar, and other journalists? Like, what are the qualities that you think we can hold up to make us better?
I think there's so many important qualities in journalism that we're all always aspiring to. I think being truthful is very important. Okay, whatever way you do it, if you are an opinionated journalist or if you're someone that strives for impartiality, I think always reporting the truth and reporting both sides of the matter is important. Letting people speak, letting people have their opinions is important. Also, persistence. Keep digging. If you're not getting the answer that you want from someone, I suppose keep asking them and keep trying to find out what is actually at the end of these stories that's causing these kind of things. You know, in the post office scandal, like I've just kind of been talking about, it's been, you know, a huge process of people constantly putting questions to people at the very top who were turning a blind eye to these issues. So I think persistence and truthfulness are probably two of the most important attributes of journalists.
My last question due to time. So, you know, in everything that we do, there are usually people that will criticize us or criticize the work we do. So have you ever been in that kind of situation?
It's you're reporting the truth. There's going to be a lot of people that don't want you to report that because either they're upset or they don't want the truth about what they've actually been doing to get out. But I think at the end of the day, you've got to keep reporting it. Whether I've had these issues or not, I don't think I have necessarily. There's definitely been a few stories that I've, you know, thought about, you know, should I do these? Should I not? Is this a dangerous thing to report on? In the end of the day, I've always continued reporting on them. There was a report I did a few years ago about a guy called Nicholas van Hoogstraten. And I was contemplating, should I do this or not? Because he's been convicted in courts, he's been sent to prison. So making these kind of films constantly has you questioning yourself. But at the end of the day, there's the motto from the Financial Times, which is without fear or favor.
Yeah.
You don't want to be fearing anyone, and you don't want to be favoring a side either. So I think that summarizes it pretty well.
But then do you think you need to have a mentor, kind of role model, somebody that you can you'll be talking to before you make any report, for example, as in, should I do this? Should I do that? What sort of advice would you give me before I venture into any kind of reporting in case I find myself, you know, plunged in some kind of trouble?
Yeah, reporting accurately is always important. And I think networking as well is important. Getting yourself a mentor that can say, this is something you should do. This is something that maybe we should stay out of. That kind of thing is very important. And what I would say is networking not just up to people that are further along than you in your career, but also across to people that are at the same stage as you in your career, so you can share contents, share ideas, and grow and develop with these people. But I think, yeah, having a mentor is invaluable.
Yeah, definitely. So I think we are running out of time. Thank you. So
okay, brilliant.
Finally, what can you say about the interview we've had with you? Briefly, less than 1 minute.
Yeah, well, I want to say thank you very much for having me on Global Arena TV. I know we've got less than a minute now, but it's been such a pleasure to talk to you guys. And thank you very, very much for having me on, because you guys have been really hospitable. You've been really kind to me. So thank you very much. Sorry, not hospitable. What's the word? Is it? I don't know. Hospitality.